On July 19th, 1977, the world teacher, the Christ Maitreya, head of the spiritual hierarchy, emerged from his ancient retreat and is now in the modern world. With his disciples, the masters of the wisdom, he will inaugurate the new age of synthesis and brotherhood.
Good morning and welcome to our World Teacher programme on Wellington's Access Radio 106.1 FM, presented by Teresa and David on behalf of Share International New Zealand.
Today, and over the next 3 or even 4 podcasts, we'll be delving into the subject of UFOs, our space brothers who pilot them, and the people who have alerted us to their presence, despite the general public's ridicule.
We'll start with an article by Gerard Aartsen entitled Gerard Adamski, a Herald for the Space Brothers, which appeared in the October 2008 edition of Share International magazine.
Gerard Aartsen, who has a master's degree in education, is an author, researcher, teacher and Share International co-worker, based in Amsterdam, the Netherlands. He begins his article with a quote by Adamski.
It was about 12:30 in the noon hour on Thursday, the 20th of November 1952, that I first made personal contact with a man from another world. He came to Earth in his spacecraft, a flying saucer. He called it a scout ship.
No lines in any of the multitude of books that have been written about UFO encounters are more famous or more disputed. They are the first lines of the chapter in Flying Saucers Have Landed, in which Gerard Adamski relates his meeting with a human being from another world, near Desert Center in Arizona. Adamski's claims were substantiated by 6 witnesses who were with him that day and who signed affidavits sworn before notaries public.
Benjamin Creme, in the preface to his first book, The Reappearance of the Christ and the Masters of Wisdom, states that Adamski's descriptions of the Space Brothers are very accurate, and that, from his own experience, he could vouch for the authenticity of his contacts.
Flying Saucers Have Landed became an overnight sensation when it was published simultaneously in the UK and the USA in September 1953. By December of that year, it had been reprinted 6 times, and in the USA its 12th reprint took place 3 years later. It was followed in 1955 by Adamski's personal account of his experience inside a mothership manned by masters from Venus, titled Inside the Spaceships.
In this book, he also writes about his discussions with several of the Space Brothers, who he refers to by names that he chose himself. Adamski explains, "While I want to make it very clear that the names I am introducing for these new friends are not their correct names, I wish to add that I have my own good reasons for choosing them, and that they are not without meaning. The Martian I shall call Furcon. The Saturnian is Ramu. My name for the Venusian will be Orthon."
A female Venusian is referred to as Kalna, and the names he uses for other spacemen are Ilmuth and Zul. Of these experiences, Benjamin Creme has said, the only thing he omitted to say, he was probably unaware of the fact, was that he was out of the body during the whole experience.
Although much has been written about him since he published his personal experiences, very little of it involved much open-mindedness, and even today the internet is rife with malicious theories, accusations, derogative comments, half-truths and lies about the person who is considered to be the first modern contactee of Space Brothers.
Especially since modern science established that there is no possibility for life on our neighbouring planets, very few authors deemed Adamski and his story worthy of serious investigation after his death on the 23rd of April 1965, aged 74.
Co-author of Flying Saucers Have Landed, Desmond Leslie, always believed in and trusted Adamski's sincerity. In his obituary for the July-August 1965 issue of Flying Saucer Review, Mr. Leslie wrote, "We shall miss George, miss him very much, but I cannot feel sad at his going. He gave his utmost to the work, and the world will never be quite the same place again, richer for his coming, a little poorer for his going. But I don't believe by any means we have seen the last of him. If he is reborn on another planet, he has promised to come back and contact us when possible. With George, anything could happen, and usually does. Dear old spaceman, go in peace."
Of all the claims of people having met occupants of flying saucers in the wake of Adamski's story, one stands out for its curious details. Having become the centre of attention for the local media and the British UFO community after reporting a UFO sighting on the 7th of June 1965 near Scorriton, Devon, UK, Ernest Arthur Bryant confessed to investigators that he had already met 3 beings from space on the 24th of April that year, who also gave him a conducted tour of their craft.
Mr. Bryant further revealed that one of the 3 had said, "My name is Yamski," or something that sounded very similar, while also speaking of a Des or a Les. The background and details of this incredible story were described in the Scorriton mystery, Did Adamski Return?, which further gained in significance when it was found that Mr. Bryant had no prior interest in the UFO phenomenon and had not heard of George Adamski before his experience.
Another remarkable encounter in the same vein was described by Giorgio Di Bitonto in his book Angels and Starships, first published in Italian in 1983. In it, he describes how, in April 1980, he saw visions of a beautiful young man who directed him to drive into the hills around Genova. He was led into a clearing in a wooded valley, where he saw a UFO that had landed and was contacted by the occupants.
He had regular contacts after his first encounter, and on one such he was introduced to space brothers who called themselves Orthon and Furcon, the same names that George Adamski used for the space brothers in Inside the Spaceships. Then the author was introduced to another man by the name of George, an unusual name among space brothers. This, our brother, lived for a while on Earth, where he chose to come on an assignment. Now he has returned to us. Kalma, Ilmuth and Zul also joined the party in Mr. Di Bitonto's description.
While the events described in the Scorriton mystery sound unlikely enough, it's even more tempting to dismiss Mr. Di Bitonto's story as the fantasy of a man seeking publicity based on the famous story of George Adamski. Although the latter wrote of the unusual beauty, serenity, and wisdom of the space brothers he met, he never referred to them as angels, as Mr. Di Bitonto does, whose main contact is called Raphael, and whose story is infused with strong Roman Catholic references and warnings.
One could be forgiven then for consigning the notion of George Adamski having been their man on Earth to the dustbin, at least until we read the account of the meeting that the publisher of Angels in Starships, former United States Air Force fighter pilot Wendell C. Stevens, had with Benjamin Creme in May 1990. In the preface to Angels in Starships, he writes, Mr. Creme affirmed that George Adamski's contacts were real and that some of them took place in dense physical reality, just as described by Adamski himself.
To a question about Adamski's contactors saying they came from Venus, Mr. Creme readily replied that it was true. In fact, he added the information that there were many Venusians among us then and even today. and that George Adamski was a Venusian spirit who had taken incarnation here for a very specific purpose, which he had fulfilled before leaving this realm in death of the physical body. According to Krem, Adamski continued in his Venusian light body after that, which does support the Skoriton story.
This, however, does not cover the extent of the mystery that was George Adamski's life. Adamski was born in April 1891 in Poland. His father was a poor carpenter who emigrated to America not long after George's birth. In her book, George Adamski, The Untold Story, Adamski's former co-worker in Switzerland, Lou Zinstag, references an early biographical detail which states that after a short period of formal schooling, Adamski was taught by private tuition.
As his parents were poor and his father died when George was still a child, Mrs. Zinstag wonders how his mother could have afforded a private tutor at all. She continues, "I suspect that the young boy must have enjoyed private tuition by a teacher or guide, connected with a group in Tibet, as he subsequently founded the Royal Order of Tibet and the monastery at Laguna Beach, California in the 30s.
Her suspicion is seconded by author Henry Doan, who claims to have had access to Adamski's private archives. He writes that, while en route to Dunkirk, New York, the Adamski party was befriended by a tall man with dark features referred to as Uncle Sid. The stranger spent many hours in the company of young George throughout the voyage, and eventually became a friend of the family after they had settled into their new home."
In his book about the early UFO contactees, titled The Pawn of His Creator, Mr. Doan also writes that after the death of George's father, Uncle Sid effectively took over the paternal responsibilities. What's more, when George became 14, his benevolent uncle offered sponsorship of his further education and suggested sending George to Tibet to a monastery of lamas.
The number of years Adamski spent in Tibet varies depending on the source, from around 4 to 6 years. Here he learnt to master the 4 elements, was taught the spirituality of the East, and practised meditation.
In 1936, 10 years before he first sighted a flying saucer, George Adamski published his first book, containing a collection of questions to answers from his audiences as a self-described wandering teacher, titled Wisdom of the Masters of the Far East.
The teachings in this booklet cover most of the basic tenets of the ageless wisdom teaching, which Adamski referred to as universal law, and later, after his mission as witness of the existence of extraterrestrial civilizations had begun, as cosmic philosophy, which was also the title of his last book, published in 1961.
Mystery, controversy, and apparent contradictions surround the lives of many initiates, but the best testimony to a man's character, if not his stature, is when his actions reflect his words. In Adamski's case, that is not difficult to establish when we compare his motto as expressed in one of his lectures.
"My advice to you is to help as many as you can. The greater the number you serve, the greater will be the understanding of yourself. This should be the motive of everyone who desires to fulfill the destiny for which he was born."
Undeterred by intimidation and undistracted by the fleeting riches of fame and money, George Adamski fulfilled his mission as the herald of the Space Brothers, broadening the horizon of many an earthling.
You're listening to the World Teacher Programme on Wellington's Access Radio 106.1 FM. And now, Benjamin Krem answers questions on George Adamski.
Author Mr. Dibitonto claims that he was taken on board a spaceship by his alien contact Raphael, who introduced him to Orthon and Furcon, alien contacts of George Adamski's, and a space brother named George, who, according to Raphael, lived for a while on Earth, where he chose to come on an assignment. Were Mr. Dibitonto's experiences real or imagined?
Real, but out of the body.
Was the space brother he met the same as the one we know as George Adamski?
The same being.
And did he indeed meet Mr. Adamski's alien contacts known as Orthon and Furcon?
Yes.
In 1965, an Englishman named Arthur Bryant, with no previous interest in UFOs, saw a UFO land near Scorriton, Devon, UK, and was contacted by a Venusian who called himself Yamski. Was this in fact the individual who had died as George Adamski a day earlier, as UFO researchers came to believe? Mr. Krem answers yes.
In his book, The Pawn of His Creator, Henry Doan writes that George Adamski was prepared under the guidance of an initiate for his future mission as a witness of the existence of extraterrestrial civilizations. As Adamski's father had died when he was still a child, he was taken under the wings of a friend of the family whom Adamski referred to as Uncle Sid, and who arranged for him to go to Tibet as a teenager to study with the masters. Was Uncle Sid a space brother or an initiate? Answer, both.
And did Adamski indeed go to Tibet for several years to study with the masters? Answer, yes.
The poetic quality, the rhythm and the colour of the prelude in George Adamski's last book, Cosmic Philosophy, seemed to me reminiscent of the writing of a master. Did this prelude, entitled The Magnificent Perception, and or other parts of this book, indeed originate from a higher source? Answer, yes.
Was it perhaps inspired by the Venusian master whose teachings Adamski recorded in his book Inside the Spaceships? Answer, yes.
Here's a couple of quotes from George Adamski's Cosmic Philosophy.
It is a man's duty to be a happy child in his father's house, and to do this he will have to be aware of the house. He must be aware that he is now in the heaven that he is seeking to enter, and that within his form of self is the ever-present all-inclusive intelligence.
Here lies the answer to the question as to the constant urge in the heart of every human to know more about the composition of forms as well as the cause and purpose of action. For it is the cause parent impressing the effective child to know more about the vast possibilities, so that he may enjoy all that the Father has to give.
And these next quotes are from George Adamski's Wisdom of the Masters of the Far East.
What law do the masters use? The masters use the law of love, which unites all in oneness. They do not resist anything, but take it into the love of the universe, separating nothing from the all, from the lowest to the highest. Love is the cosmic secret of the universe, if there were any secrets, but nothing is hidden or kept apart in love, as it is all-inclusive.
What is the universe? The universe is the all in all planets of all solar systems, all chemicals from the highest invisible states to the lowest solidified forms, all vibrations, all intelligence, all consciousness, or, in other words, the entirety of God and its various manifestations that compose the perfect whole.
What is consciousness? Consciousness is the life force of all forms. It is that which sees, hears, and feels through the senses. When consciousness leaves the body, the person is pronounced dead. But consciousness is everlasting and universal. Mortal consciousness is awareness of self as form, separate from the whole. Universal consciousness is awareness of all things as one.
To whom does spiritual understanding come? Spiritual understanding comes to him who is least desirous of personal attainment, who is most sincere in devoted service to the All, and the least conscious of his own personal ego. He who gives much, to him shall much be given.
Our final contribution to this podcast is sourced from Share International, October 2008. It's a book review by Gerard Aartsen of Desmond Leslie's The Amazing Mr. Lutterworth, published by Alan Wingate, London, UK, in 1958, and begins:
Even if The Amazing Mr. Lutterworth does not stand among the greatest literary achievements of the 20th century, there are several compelling reasons why this novel by Desmond Leslie deserves renewed interest 60 years after it was published.
Leslie, 1921 to 2001, is best known for the seminal book on UFOs, Flying Saucers Have Landed, which he co-authored with George Adamski. He was also a screenwriter, film director, and pioneer of electronic music. It is well known that considerable forces tried to undermine George Adamski's mission to inform the world of his contacts with the Space Brothers.
We now know, through information from Benjamin Creme's master, that the solution to the world's energy problems, the technology of light, which is being developed in cooperation with the Space Brothers, will be released when humanity has had a definite change of heart and accepts the principle of sharing. That change of heart, we have been told, will take place on the day when Maitreya mentally overshadows all of humanity and declares himself openly. Amazingly, exactly 60 years ago, Desmond Leslie brought together all these elements in an all but forgotten novel.
In a book by Lou Zinstag, George Adamski, The Untold Story, Leslie admits that his novel, The Amazing Mr. Lutterworth, was actually 75% non-fiction, and the principal character of the plot was, of course, George Adamski. This is reflected in the fact that the author dedicated the novel, among others, to G.A. Although there is a character called Elias Minovsky in the book, who is modelled on Adamski living on Mount Ramolap, Palomar spelt backwards, and who writes cockeyed philosophy that no one will publish and makes vague photographs of flying saucers, the real Adamski in this novel is the protagonist John Hollings Lutterworth.
We first meet Mr. Lutterworth while he tries to regain his memory on a liner en route from England to New York City. He is in possession of 78 tube-shaped crystals that he suspects are crucial to his mission, but an unfortunate fall during a tour of the ship prevents him from remembering what it was.
Upon his arrival in New York, he is persuaded to meet Mr. Hasley B. Widlow, the president of Global Oil Corporation, who offers him $500,000 plus royalties for the crystals and the blueprint of a working device.
As Mr. Lutterworth is still at a loss due to his amnesia as to the nature of his mission and the crystals, he negotiates some time to consider the offer. He plans to make his way to California to meet Minovsky, hoping to find out more about the crystals and what he is supposed to do with them.
The novel follows Mr. Lutterworth as he struggles to remember his mission to save humanity from the consequences of corporate greed in the form of Global Oil, that wants to prevent the distribution of an alien device for the production of unlimited energy to protect its profits.
While the story is interspersed with matter-of-fact references to the cosmic philosophy of universal law, about the oneness of mankind and the law of karma, as expounded in Adamski's book Inside the Spaceships, the General Assembly of the United Nations Organization, which numbered 78 members when the novel was written, is the backdrop for the grand finale of the story.
It is at the United Nations Organization building in New York that Mr. Lutterworth finally pierces through his self-imposed, as we discover later, amnesia, which served to protect him until he had completed his mission, and realizes he is really one of the Space Brothers who are working to save humanity. The scene that follows could almost be a script for the day of declaration, when the brother materializes in front of the General Assembly.
I raise my arms and the gasps and babble die down. I begin to speak the words we knew and decided long ago. Each hears me in his own tongue.
As he mentally overshadows all of the members of the General Assembly, the brother fulfills his mission by distributing the crystals as the key to the salvation of the world, so that no single country or party can monopolize the alien technology, while he conveys these words.
This power, I tell them, shall change the face of the earth. No more shall small groups nor even single men be able to rule multitudes through hunger in their bellies, for there shall be no more hunger, nor want, nor cold. And in time again there shall be no more disease. For as man learns to live in harmony with nature, instead of continually struggling against it, he will destroy the cause of disease.
And that concludes our programme today. Tune in to our next World Teacher programme on Saturday the 24th of February at 10 a.m. for more revelations about our Space Brothers and their message of peace.
If you would like more information on UFOs and the emergence of the World Teacher Maitreya, along with the Masters of Wisdom, our phone number is 0636461101. The website is share-international.org.
To receive our free-of-charge monthly newsletter, which contains a small selection of articles from the Share International magazine, the number is 04234 1133, or you can write to P.O. Box 9576 Wellington.
You have been listening to Teresa and David on behalf of Share International New Zealand. You can listen again to this podcast and previous ones by visiting our new library at shareinternationalnewzealand.wordpress.com and click on the radio tab.